Welcome to the inaugural program of Globespan 24x7, specifically entitled Transparency and Accountability. The main objective of this inaugural program is to enlighten the citizens, the viewers, on the subject of transparency and accountability, to create greater public awareness, to stimulate informed debates using accurate, verifiable data and information, to have an impact on improvement of governance of natural resources and lead to greater benefits to the citizens. On today's inaugural program, we have a distinguished panel, including Mr. Roopnarine, Dhanraj from the New York University, former administrator for many years. We have the chair of the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the TTEITI. As we know, Trinidad has been a founding member of the EITI, which has its head office in Norway. So we are very honored to have a representative from Trinidad on today's program. Mr. McGuire will tell us a little bit more about himself later on after I finish introducing the others. We have Mr. Anand Goolsarran, the former Auditor General of Guyana. We also have a consultant who was with Chatham House at one time, and he is Mr. Anthony Paul, who was an advisor to the Guyana government on local content policy. He's here with us, and our fourth person here is Miss Ana Maria Rodrigues Contreras. She is from Colombia, and she has some difficulties in joining at this particular time span, but there is a recording of her discussion with me earlier. And if she cannot join us during this program, we are going to play her recording so that the panelists can listen to her and discuss her perspective and share their views on her perspective as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, please permit me to, first of all, ask each participant to introduce themselves individually. So let us start with you, Mr. Roopnarine Dhanraj. Please tell our viewers a little bit about yourself as we go into this very important subject of transparency and accountability. We've been hearing a lot about transparency and accountability all over the world. So we'll go deeper into that later on. But first of all, please do introduce yourself to the viewers of this program.
Okay, my name is Roopnarine Dhanraj. Many refer to me as Dan because of some difficulty in pronouncing it. I came from the Caribbean, Trinidad to be specific. Migrated to the US some 39 years ago with the best family in the world. I am fortunate to have a combined lifetime of working experience spanning 52 years and counting. Perhaps the term jack of all trades, master of none applies to me. I want to thank my friend Dr. Rudy for inviting me so I can share this platform with such a distinguished panel as well as viewers. Mr. Rudy has a lifelong passion for serving. The topic of this discussion is what he breathes and lives for. Coincidentally, all my life, I have the fire in my belly for acquiring knowledge to improve my life as well as others. So when Mr. Rudy invited me to this panel discussion, I jumped on board.
That's it?
That's me in a nutshell.
All right, thank you very much. Your nutshell is very small.
Well, I have things to go, but it's...
Thank you very much. Well, later on, we're going to find out a little bit more about you, and I look forward to future engagements as well. So, Mr. Gregory McGuire, chairman of the EITI and consultant for a company, VLS, please introduce yourself before I make mistake and say things that I don't know.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Rudy, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the forum. So I am the current chair of EITI. I've been chair now, I think I'm on my third year at EITI. But prior to that, I think the 2 or 3 major places that engaged my attention and helped to build my skill sets were I commenced my career at the central bank way back when. I worked at the bank for about 9 years in the research department, headed what was then the energy desk at the department of the bank, central bank. I transitioned from that to the National Gas Company, where I spent some 24 years, primarily in charge of strategy. Did a little bit of, but was deeply involved in the marketing arrangements for the initial LNG project. Did significant growth of the domestic gas market that we don't hear nothing at all about, but that's the light industrial and commercial sector that was fell under my portfolio for about 15 years. And I also had a stint at the university that sort of ran in parallel with my latter years at NGC, where I was senior lecturer, visiting senior lecturer on energy strategy and project evaluation. So that that combination of corporate experience is what has led me to basically establish a consulting practice around those areas and offer those services of economics, energy, and strategy to various clients in Trinidad and across the region. So that's a short story.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregory McGuire. And now we move on to the next participant, Mr. Anand Goolsarran, former Auditor General of Guyana, who is a prolific writer in our daily newspapers, and he writes on Accountability Watch. So, Mr. Goolsarran, please go ahead and introduce yourself for those viewers who may not know you. I know most people know you, but please, just for the records. Is Mr. Goolsarran there? I think he's on mute.
Oh, you're hearing me now?
Yeah, we can't see you.
I was saying that you've done all the introduction on my behalf. So there's very little I could say except that to elaborate a little that I'm a weekly columnist with the Starbuck News, and my column is entitled Accountability Watch. It's published every Monday. I hope my readership extends to the diaspora. I know they're having difficulties in accessing the full article, but nevertheless, so prior to my becoming columnist in the Starbuck News, I worked with the United Nations as executive secretary for the UN Board of Auditors and the panel of external auditors. And that was when I retired prematurely from Guyana as Auditor General. I served as Auditor General between 1990 and 2005. I was supposed to have retired at the age of 65, but I've chosen to do that at age 55, 10 years before my expected retirement date. In the UN, I worked for a while in Africa, Sierra Leone and Liberia. I had a small stint in Cote d'Ivoire. Then sometime in 2015, I took up an appointment as a PFM consultant in Afghanistan to assist the National Audit Office there. But the assignment came to a premature end because of the security situation. I was forced to leave the country, and then I returned to Guyana, and I became this columnist for the Starbuck News. So that's my background. I hope that's enough.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goolsarran. And now our next participant, Mr. Anthony Paul, who
Thank you.
remember worked on the local content policy, and I had the honor of meeting him while I was the national coordinator of the Guyana EITI at the beginning. So,
Thank you
Mr.
very
Paul, can you please introduce yourself on a wider scale to our viewers?
Thank you, Dr. Rudy, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with this distinguished panel here tonight. I hope I can add some value beyond what these gentlemen will bring, and lady. I am, by training and background, a geologist and a geophysicist. I've worked most of my career in exploration and production for oil and gas. First for the Trinidad Ministry, where I worked as a geologist, worked through this system, became director of geology and geophysics, worked in the national oil company, setting up a geophysics department and leading that for some years. Then worked with the multinational companies in different roles: exploration manager, production manager, development manager. I did a stint in strategy at head office, which really opened my eyes to the difference from how we see the oil and gas, the industry on the ground in an operational perspective, and how it's seen at head office, and how much we distinguish, we put value one way or the other. And it struck me after working in these places in government, state companies, national companies, foreign multinationals. After 25 years, I needed to work for myself. And then I tried to figure out what to do. And it came about that I met up with a group in London called the Revenue Watch. And they were interested in the work I was doing. And it turns out there was a whole movement back in the early 2000s. 2005 or thereabouts, 2003, 4, 5, around revenue management. Things like Publish What You Pay, Revenue Watch. These were ventures or entities that were coming up. And they were keen to help countries get more value from oil and gas and retain it. But their focus was on more fiscal value, more taxes, and preventing corruption, because they saw the leakage to be a corruption issue. Pretty soon they discovered that actually in Africa, for instance, there's a lot more leakage from poor governance, from lack of capacity in the regulators and the policymakers than there was for corruption. So the focus moved towards capacity building for the regulators, for the policymakers. But what we all know, we all have on the books very good laws. We have ministries with many people in different positions, all kinds of titles and degrees. But we know that doesn't give us the results we expect. So there's something missing, and it's how do you get those two things to work to get the results you want?
That is what we're going to discuss.
The institutions and the people, the institutions and the legislative framework. So it came down to me, it came quickly to a question of good governance. And good governance, I've found out over time, only really happens when those charged to operate, manage, fix, maintain the instruments of governance, legislation, regulations, policy, and so on, until those who are charged to do that can be held to account. We have no guarantee or no assurance that we'll get what we're looking for.
Mr. Paul, sorry to interrupt you. We are doing the self-introduction right now. We're going to go into the details of the presentations later on.
And because I discovered that, I ended up working in that space. So I've been advising since then, mostly governments, around governance systems for oil and gas, targeting, capturing more value. So you for instance, you described the work I did in Guyana. on a local content policy. But a policy doesn't implement itself. You have to have some mechanism to do that. So I worked in Guyana subsequent to that on support in writing legislation. I didn't write it, I supported a team writing it. But I also worked on the implementation plan and the institutional structure to put that plan in place, to make that plan work. I worked in different countries in Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, quite a few, helping write policies. But I also worked on governance systems, meaning designing an institution, putting in place, or helping them put in place the operation systems and procedures to make sure that the institution and the people there are doing their work. But importantly, I always focus on how do you make sure that those doing that work are held accountable. So I've been working to bring it all together, Dr. Rudy. I've been working in the accountability space, coming from the perspective of you want to manage this sector to capture more value. You can put things in place to do that, but unless those who are doing it are held to account, and unless you put mechanisms in place to hold them to account. So I've kind of worked from the whole high-level policy space into the implementation space and the nuts and bolts of getting governance, getting accountability done. So that's why I mentioned the framework so I can narrow down to what I've done.
Thank you very much. That's a very good in-depth introduction of yourself, and I'm sure that our viewers will be looking forward to hearing from you more on that subject with that vast experience that you have in transparency and accountability in many countries around the world. I'm sure your contribution here today and in future programs would be very, very helpful to all of us. So let us move on to the next person we have here. Oh, Miss Ana Maria Rodrigues Contreras from Colombia. She unfortunately cannot come on live at the program. She might join us if she can. She has some family issues with her kid, and she asked me to apologize to everyone. We had advertised for her, but what we did earlier, we recorded a conversation with her, and we will be playing that one. Ana Maria Rodrigues was a World Bank consultant to the Guyana EITI at one point, and she also worked with Suriname and Colombia and Dominican Republic in the sphere of transparency and accountability. Right now, she said she's at a project for peace in Colombia. You know, they have the guerrilla warfare and all kinds of stuff going on there with the money laundering and the drug lords and so on in Colombia. She's working on a peace document. So that's a little introduction to Miss Ana Maria Rodrigues Contreras. So let us move on to our program today, into the substance of the program, having completed that round of self-introduction by our participants. So the first thing we wanted to, we have been hearing this thing, transparency, accountability. Everybody's saying it, even the criminals are saying that. So we want transparency and accountability. So we have a distinguished, learned, experienced panel here today. And I would like to let our viewers hear from you yourselves as the professionals in this field who have actually worked there. And I'm sure you've done a lot of research on that. I know most of you already did a lot of writings. So please let us hear from you directly. Who would like to start first? This is a democratic program, Globespan 24x7. And let me take a minute to introduce myself. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Rudy Jadoopat. I was up to March 2022, I was the first Guyana National Coordinator for the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. I'm currently in New York. I studied international economics. I have a master's degree in state planning. I also did my doctorate dissertation, which I successfully defended at the Moscow State Lomonosov University a long time ago, on the topic of economic development of Guyana and problems of regulating international economic relations. And that's in brief. I work in many countries, including Russia, the United States. I work in the UK. I work in Lithuania. I work in Guyana. So I have a kind of an understanding of management and transparency and accountability, and how governance issues are, supposed to be taking place and formulated. Also, I'm very concerned about the current situation around the world. Everybody would like to hear about transparency and accountability, and we have this, this distinguished panel here to teach us about that. Tell us more. We want to learn. One of the important things for this Globespan program entitled Transparency and Accountability is to create greater public awareness. We know that Guyana and many countries, including Trinidad, they have published EITI reports. The reports are up there. However, requirement 7 of the EITI standard says it doesn't make sense having the report if the data and information in the report cannot be used to create greater public awareness, to create informed debates using this data and information. So our, I think, mission here is to help everyone to satisfy that international requirement, greater public awareness using accurate, verifiable data and information. Instead of this hearsay thing, we are not going to go into too much of that. We're going to focus on data and information that can be verified. And the EITI is a very good example. Mr. McGuire will tell us more about that, because the requirement is that the data and information in the EITI report must be complete and comprehensive. Two important words, which I'm going to stop there for now. That's a brief introduction to myself. And we're going to ask, who would like to go first? Maybe Mr. McGuire? Mr. McGuire is here on?
You're muted, Gregory.
Yes, Chair. Good.
Okay. Mr. McGuire, we give you, since Trinidad has been a founding member of the EITI, we have the honor, we want to present you today that opportunity to start the inaugural program discussion on transparency and accountability, sponsored by Globespan 24x7. Today, Wednesday, 7th of September, 2022, 7:30 p.m. we started. The first program is historic. And so please go right ahead. Tell us what you think about transparency. What is transparency? What is accountability? And how transparency and accountability impacts improvement in the governance of natural resources so that the citizens can benefit better?
Yes, I think I would want to start by saying, first of all, Trinidad and Tobago was the first country in the region to join EITI. But EITI was around, I think, a few years before we actually joined. But we're the first in the region to join it. And we, and Trinidad and Tobago did do a lot in terms of helping to spread the word about the importance of EITI. But to get more specifically to your question, so for me, transparency is making critical data on information available, easily accessible, right, and to the public, to the general public, and usable to the general public. So it's pointless just putting data out there and it's not usable. It's not in a manner that people could use and understand it. It has to bring utility to the people. I think this is very, very important, in particular for the extractive industries, because, you know, unlike other industries, the extractive industries, we say, and I've always argued, belongs to the people. The resources belongs to everyone. And therefore, everyone needs to know, or ought to know, who's making money, where the money is going, how the money is being spent, how the shares are being divided, what does the government take, what does the companies take, how much are they paying, and so on. And this is what the whole movement to transparency and revenue watches, as Tony referenced to, is based on. And in fact, it all as well was driven back then by this whole notion that resource-rich countries face both a blessing and a curse. The whole idea about resources being a curse came about partly because so much of the resource wealth was well, I can't even say misdistributed, but so much of the resource wealth ended up in hands that did not necessarily contribute to it. And that distribution of wealth called a lot of these things into concern. So that's the foundation for me for the need for greater transparency and accountability with respect to our natural resources. It's to repeat, it is it's primarily because the resources belong to the people, and the people have a right to know because what is happening with their resources and what is happening with their wealth.
Thank you very much. Let us move on to the same question to Mr. Roopnarine Dhanraj, sir.
I'll tell you what I was thinking. I'm not very specific about governments, although I have some ideas about it. So I want to tell you what I have done. I will elicit many examples and analogies from my background, but I can only present you with a couple of them because of the constraints of time. I know that the DNA ingredient is a common denominator in every field of human endeavor, and so it's needed more than ever today. Now, in most countries, the elected representatives who form governments and swear to God to serve the people, uphold their constitution, and utilize all natural resources in the country for the benefit of the people. But alas, we know that though all promise, few deliver. As a result, people endure massive poverty, hunger, homelessness, and so much more. And this occurs while those in authority live in luxury and have all their needs met. I'm sure some of you remember Haile Selassie, the leader of Ethiopia, a couple of decades ago. His country was considered the poorest in the world, with hunger and famine. But it was reported that he had an army of dogs he fed 3 times a day with raw meat. Case in point for transparency and accountability. Now, in the world as of today, ripe with misinformation, disinformation, lack of trust, dislike, even hatred, who or what can we turn to? It is more important than ever to educate and open up the consciousness of people everywhere regarding this super important topic of transparency and accountability. And if we can do that, it would make significant headway into improving the lives of others and surely improve this earthly home of ours. And so my contribution tonight lies within the realm of individual, personal, and spiritual development. In our lives, 2 immense forces converge to shape it: karma and destiny. They are intertwined, and the search for truth meets head-on with the path of transparency and accountability. I have a few examples to give where I did my research. Is this a good time to bring in those, or leave that for later, Mr. Rudy?
Well, it's up to you. You have 5 minutes maximum time for this initial presentation.
Okay, so let me go right in. I will start with, let's see.
You already have 2 minutes, so you have another 3 minutes.
So I'll begin with Satya Sai Baba. In his book Satyam Shubham Shubham, he extols the meaning of the 3 journeys: birth, death, and past.
Problem with your sound, I think. Okay, you're better now. We couldn't hear you properly just now.
Okay. At birth, he explains it means into truth we are born. Life, he explains, as into goodness we live. Passing, he explains as into reality into beauty. You may ask how this is relevant to transparency and accountability. I would say if we can open up our hearts, minds, and intellect, ethical and moral reasoning, and the actions that stem from TNA, our selfless actions will be full of transparency and accountability. My next example is from the Bhagavad Gita. The great Hindu Bible known as the Bhagavad Gita reveals the wisdom of the ages from the words of an incarnation of divinity. He expounds ethical reasoning rather than logical reasoning as the way to a better life and on the path to truth. You see, logical reasoning is based on individual experiences through the filters of heart, mind, and emotions. But by using yoga and meditation techniques, we would then develop what is called experiential knowledge. Now, our experience is not really truth because, you know, there are 8 billion people on the planet and everybody has their own experience. So does truth have 8 billion examples? No, truth is the one. And so our experiences are undoubtedly faulty, and thereby our output of thought, speech, and action are equally not truthful. But the process to get there is not easy. The Gita emphasizes the path to get there by using yoga and meditation techniques. We would then develop experiential knowledge that transcends reasoning and logic. And this way, we can transform our minds, hearts, and intellect and remove the selfish component in our system. And if we do so, we will surely understand and implement transparency and accountability at all levels, from the personal level right up to the governmental level. The third example I have my computer is acting up. So anyway, I'll continue. Is everything muted or can you hear me? So I'm going to talk about moral compass. I've long since felt that the world is not moving in the right direction. It may be because we have lost our moral compass. I feel if we can regain that compass, we can point to the true magnetic north. Great improvement can be made in lives everywhere, and we can only get there with soul searching within the context of ethical and moral thinking. As this discussion on transparency and accountability leads the way. Okay, let me wrap up with something I wanted to add in here. Now, I do have several more analogies within my arsenal, but because of the constraints of time, I'm unable to cover all. I'm willing to come back and elaborate further if allowed to do so on this program. Now, just to give you a hint, some of those topics include gardening, because I'm a gardener, Mahatma Gandhi, his teachings, the human fly, government, gap, generally accepted accounting procedures, Johari window, and black box. And I thank the audience immensely for participating, with the hope you have taken away something to improve your lives and the world at the moment. And yes, we surely need it. That's it, Mr. Rudy and panel.
Dr. Jadoopat, can you unmute on your system?
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you very much, Mr. Dhanraj. Maybe we should have a special program about spirituality and transparency, because that seems to be the focus of your insight here today. So let us move on to Mr. Anand Goolsarran, former Auditor General. Please go ahead and give us your perspective on transparency and accountability, sir. I'm sure you have a lot to say. Tell our viewers what you think transparency is and how transparency and accountability can lead to improved governance of the natural resources and hence to greater benefits to the citizens who are the actual, as Mr. McGuire said, actual owners of the natural resources.
Thank you very much. I would say that transparency is about making decisions in accordance with relevant laws and established rules and regulations, and making them freely available and directly accessible to those who are affected by such decisions. It's about openness, it's about honesty, it's about being straightforward about the operations of an organization. Of course, it's subject to certain safeguards. For example, commercial secrecy, that has to be protected. Personal privacy has to be respected. And in the case of government, one has to make sure that there are no implications for foreign policy and national security. So, generally speaking, that is what I would say transparency is all about. Now, coming to EITI, I recall in 2015, I was asked by the European Union to do an assignment in Guyana, and one of the tasks had to do with preparing a budget transparency action plan for the government. And the official from the EU mentioned that maybe I should incorporate in that plan that Guyana should seek to have membership of the EITI. That was in 2015, and it was put in the Budget Transparency Action Plan. It was approved by the government, the plan, with that element about membership, Guyana's membership to the EITI. And I think, Rudy, you will know more than I do. EITI, Guyana EITI came into existence in 2017. Am I correct?
Yes, Guyana was accepted as a member of the EITI. We tendered the application for membership after satisfying the preconditions for candidate countries. In August and in October 2017, Guyana became an implementing country of the EITI standard.
So since then, I became very interested in the work of the EITI. I did a lot of research, and in fact, I wrote several articles on Guyana EITI, your first report, your second report, and I think you did a third report, then the independent evaluation exercise, and there was another one, the validation exercise conducted by the parent body. So I've done some work on EITI, and I'm very interested in EITI because I believe, and in fact, it's in one of our legislation, the GMC Act, which says Guyana's resources belong to the citizens of this country, and they must be exploited to ensure that there is maximum benefit to be derived on behalf of the citizens. Well, when you look at the Exxon contract, it's quite the reverse of that. So let's come to accountability. So we talk a little about transparency. I would say that one Louis Brandeis in 1913 He said that sunlight is said to be the best disinfectant. And I'm sure we all heard about that. And then he later said, if the broad light of day could be let in upon men's actions, it would purify them as the sun disinfects. I recall in my primary school days, when my headmaster would hold a sermon on a Monday morning, and one of the things I remember him saying, said, what thou doest in the closet shall be set on the rooftop. What thou doest. And I believe in that. I believe in that. And those words guide me, throughout my life. As a kid going to primary school, I remember those words until this day. Now, so that's about transparency. Accountability, I wrote, I don't know how many people have seen this book that I wrote. It's called Improving Public Accountability, the Guyana Experience, 1985 to 2007. I think it's available at Amazon.com. And this is what I wrote. An accountability arrangement exists when the responsibility for a course of action or the management of resources is delegated from one person to another. The latter having an obligation to account to the former and in a very timely manner in relation to that responsibility or in the way the resources have been utilized to achieve stated objectives. That's a kind of definition I have put in that book. So you cannot have an accountability arrangement if you own the resources, because you'll be accountable to yourself, and that's not accountability. Is when there are resources that belong to other people, and you are required to manage those resources on behalf of the owners, then an accountability arrangement exists. So you have accountability arrangements in the private sector, companies. You have senior management, they are accountable to the board, and the board is accountable to the shareholders. At the national level, at the governmental level, the government is accountable to the citizens of this country, or any country, through their elected representatives in the legislature. And I've written that accountability is so much enriched if it is seen as a moral act given voluntarily as opposed to being imposed. And imposed accountability is likely to result in minimal compliance, minimum compliance, or no compliance. And
Okay,
there's so many examples in Guyana that
Goolsarran, can you please wrap up? We have 1 more minute.
I have 1 more minute. But I have so many things. Anyway.
Yeah. No, but for this part, later on we might have more time allocated.
All right, I can come back, but I just want to make 1 point. Former U.S. ambassador in 1989 had said that every system of public accountability should embrace the following. Every act or action is done openly according to law and prudent judgment. Every actor is responsible for his or her action. Every act is documented and reported publicly. Every act or action is subject to independent, professional, non-partisan audit review and public reporting of the results. And finally, when the review shows that purposeful error has been made, prompt corrective action, including punishment where appropriate, is taken. All right, done.
I like that one. Punishment. What kind of punishment? You'll probably tell us about that later on. That are good punishment, or appropriate punishment. Think about it, and we can talk about that later in your next follow-up
Okay.
participation contribution. Mr. Anthony Paul, we'd like to hear from you, sir. You traveled to many countries. You work with a lot of countries and citizens there. And what are some of the issues on transparency and accountability that you can share with our viewers here today and this inaugural program of Globespan 24x7 on transparency and accountability that should lead towards improvement in governance of natural resources and therefore greater benefit to the citizens? Your experience, sir.
Sure. So what I've seen in various places, Dr. Rudy, is that many countries like mine, like ours, came out of the colonial season, colonial time.
You mean like Trinidad and Tobago?
Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, so the countries like ours, came out of colonialism. And in colonialism, decisions about how we operate were taken in the colonial center. Even the corporations that worked in our midst, whether they were oil companies or shale companies, they had a head office that made certain decisions. And all we had to do was to manage what was happening on the ground. And we will take it for granted that somebody up there is making the right decisions and doing the right things. And we didn't question it. So when we became independent, that somebody became the government. And they were doing the things we thought were in a right way. And Gregory will recall this, that we went through a time in Trinidad, for instance, where our industry was carrying the country, but the people running it were stellar individuals in terms of their intellect, their nationalism, the way they worked, right? And they ran the system very well for us. So the people trusted them. You know, at a point there was some questioning, and a choice had to be made. Do we take the time and bring the people up to speed and explain to them what's happening and get them engaged in discussions? And that was tried. And actually, when that was tried, there was a lot of pushback that reflected more a lack of proper communication on the side of the senders rather than the receivers. But the senders are the one making decisions. So what happened in Trinidad is that the doors were closed, information was shut down, and they didn't have that flow again. So the trust was there and that carried us for a while. But once people change, without accountability, that trust can be abused. Now, let me tell you what I see transparency is, especially in extractives in oil and gas, for instance. Oil and gas, as at least 3 speakers so far, yourself included, have said, belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the government elected, it doesn't belong to the political party, it doesn't belong to the public servants. It belongs to the people. Now imagine you and I were brothers, Rudy, and our father left us an estate, and they had some houses, there's some coconut trees, some mango trees, a beach, right? And he tell us, get somebody to manage that for you. Get a real estate or somebody to manage it for you. You guys go and study, do your work, right? Let that person rent out the houses, hire somebody to pick the mangoes, the coconuts, right? And make sure that that person puts in place rules that they follow for themselves, and the people they hire follow those rules, right? And imagine, Rudy, you and I, father sent me overseas to study, come home, meet the estate agent, and he tell us, oh, I have all these contracts, I'm getting all this money, and so I show you the contracts. He said, oh, I can't show you that, that's confidential between me and the contractor. I said, well, tell me how much money you get per mango. I can't tell you that, it's confidential. You understand what I'm saying? So you're telling the owner that I've made a deal that keeps you out of information on the very core specifics of that deal. To me, transparency is about respecting the owner and respecting the owner's rights. And not only, as Gregory, as somebody said earlier, not only giving them information in a way they can use it.
In other words, can I interject here? But the contracts are available, are disclosed according to the EITI, and the revenues are being published.
Trinidad is a signatory to EITI a long time ago. Trinidad does not disclose contracts.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just chip in here on that matter very quickly. There are perhaps two continuing issues, major continuing issues with EITI implementation in Trinidad. One is this whole business of contract transparency, and the other is the business of audit access to BIR submissions by the companies. So because the tax regulation in Trinidad has a big confidentiality cloud over it, and not even the government's internal auditors can go into Board of Inland Revenue and get individual company tax statements. So for the EITI process, what has happened is that we've had to do a workaround, and BIR would fill out the template that is sent to them and send it back to the auditor.
For the viewers, BIR means Board of
Inland Revenue.
Inland Revenue.
Yeah, which is the tax authority, will complete the templates and send those templates back to the internal auditor. But the actual statements that were sent to BIR by the companies, there's no sight of that. No one else gets a sight of that. And that's one problem. That's the other problem, of course, is contract transparency. And what we've been trying to do, and what we have done, is draft the EITI legislation, which is meant to, in part, to treat with those two major issues. And the EITI legislation has not been progressed as yet. It's still, I don't even think it has gone beyond the ministry. So we're some ways back where that is concerned. Having said that, though, I don't think we've had a major problem with the macro numbers in Trinidad. I think we're now discovering that when you start to drill down, that there may be questions asked. In other words, the history has shown that what the companies pay is what the government receives. But I think that going beyond that, when you start to drill down and ask yourself, are the companies paying what they're supposed to pay? I think that's where some issues are beginning to surface and some discoveries are beginning to be made.
Okay, continue. Please continue, Mr. Paul.
Yeah. So Gregory hits on some points at which can lead us into another conversation. So, for instance, he started making the defense of the not having contracts available or all revenue available because the legislation says that. The question I ask is, who wrote the legislation? It's our legislation. We can change it to meet our needs. What we tended to do is to do things to satisfy some external body, EITI, rather than our own people. Now, in truth and in fact, I interpret our law based on my English language understanding. I'm not a lawyer. There's certain things that should be done in terms of transparency that are not being done. And there's no movement by the government to fix those gaps. And there hasn't been because there's no accountability on the part of the lawyers. I think it's one of the earlier speakers mentioned about government officers, ministers taking an oath to uphold the law. And here we have laws that are not being followed, and if laws are not, as the earlier speaker said, the assets of the nation are meant to be managed in best interests of the country and the people. And if the laws aren't doing that, then those laws should be amended accordingly.
When you said the laws are not being followed, you mean the laws are not being enforced. Is that correct?
Yes.
Not being enforced. One second. Just for clarification purposes, for viewers to understand better, when laws are made, is it correct that the law is supposed to stipulate how it's supposed to be enforced and what are the penalties for violations and what are the penalties for non-enforcement?
Except those penalties tend to refer to the public or the contractor in this case. It doesn't refer to if the regulator doesn't do its job and enforce the law. There's no penalty on the government ministers or public servants if they don't do their work.
But don't you think there should be?
Well, that's the point.
Expert?
That's where accountability comes in, right? If you're supposed to do something and you're not doing it, you should be sanctioned. Now, on the other side, I am a firm believer, and if you're doing it well, you should be rewarded. And that other side of the coin is part of the problem. We do not reward our public servants well enough. We were told by the elite of the World Bank and the IMF in the 80s to cut your public service, to cut your spend. The biggest employer in our countries was the public service. So at the time of a big natural resource boom, we built up capability to manage it. And then because of the busts of the 80s, we pulled away that capability. And now this next boom, we haven't got that capability. That gives the companies, the investors, the foreigners, a big handicap, a big hand over us. So we don't have the capacity to regulate properly. So it's not that the people aren't good or aren't doing their work. It's just they haven't got enough of them with the right tools to do it or being rewarded well enough to incentivize them to do it well. So accountability can only apply if you have empowered and capable regulators. And empowered means you must give them the tools, whether it's regulation, technology, or funding to do their job. So it's not a simple following the laws. It's about the whole system of governance that needs to be put in place to get those things right. So I make the point about the ownership. And I think that's fundamental to understanding how you define transparency. As an owner, you want to make sure that the person you employ or engage to manage on your behalf is working in your best interest. And to do that, you must have access, as everybody described, full, accurate, current information. And you can't hide behind rules that I signed this contract with this guy about picking the mangoes, and the contract says I can't disclose it. That is rubbish. Yes. You know?
So let us move on. Are you finished? You want to wrap up?
I'm finished.
Okay. Yeah. I think your presentation here actually leads us directly into the next aspect of our discussion today, which has to do with the examples of legislative framework for transparency. And I think Mr. McGuire, you might want to start off on that because you mentioned that in your remarks as well, your opening statements.
Yeah, I said that, you know, several countries I know, I think, have actually gone the route of developing EITI legislation. And we too, in Trinidad and Tobago, have a draft legislation on the table, but it has not been placed in Parliament as yet. I don't know exactly where it is. Let's just say it has not been implemented, although it has been drafted for quite a while now. Essentially, the legislation seeks to do a couple of things. One is it seeks to make EITI reporting mandatory for all companies. So right now, compliance and reporting is a voluntary activity. Mercifully, most of the companies that are in Trinidad and Tobago in the extractive sector do participate in the EITI process. But the legislation is meant to make that mandatory, both for the oil and gas as well as the mining companies. And secondly, it is also meant to remove those two major constraints that we spoke about, which is the constraints around contract transparency, as well as the access to the Board of Inland Revenue submissions made by the companies. The third aspect of it, of course, is to make the EITI independent body. TTEITI is not an independent body by any means. We behave independently, we try to, but it's fully funded by the government, and it sits in the Ministry of Energy. it's not a situation that I'm comfortable with at all. And so the legislation seeks to make it an independently funded body and so on. So those are some of the four major aspects of what the legislation seeks to do. Remove the two major barriers that we see, as well as grant us some independence.
Thank you very much. Mr. Goolsarran, you might be able to tell us what is the status of Guyana's legislation that's related to transparency and accountability, you being the accountability watch expert in the media recently. I mean, for a long time now.
Okay, I've just listed 5 just quickly. We have the Access to Information Act. It was passed.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. We have the Access to Information Act, which was passed in 2011. But my assessment is that it is not effective. We have a Commissioner of Information, and very little has happened in terms of people being able to access information. The most recent example had to do with there was where the Commissioner of Information said, well, you can get information from the ministry, and the ministry said, well, the ministry is very silent. It had to do with, I can't remember, but we have the Access to Information Act since 2011, and it has not been effective. You will recall, Rudy, that I had recommended that that we should have legislation for the Guyana EITI. Currently, it is under the ministry. It is a department under the Ministry of Natural Resources, and it has very limited staffing and restricted budget. And in one of my recommendations to the EU in the EU report is that we should have legislation, and so that it can be provided. Guyana EITI can be provided with adequate resources and can be independently managed without interference from the executive branch. So those are 2. In Guyana, we have the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, which is a good act, I would say. It talks about a lot about budgeting and accountability issues on the whole. Then we have the Procurement Act, which also is a good act, but there are problems also. There are problems. The big problem has to do with compliance, and it has to do with the people you put in place to oversee the system. If they're not independent-minded or they're politically aligned, then you have a problem. And this is the problem throughout the length and breadth of Guyana, where you might have very good legislation, but you put people in place who are malleable, who can be influenced easily by the authorities. And the 5th one I would mention is the Audit Act, which I was fortunate to have drafted just before I demitted office. And that act provides for the independence and constitutionality of the audit office with independent resources, staffing, and what have you. Some of the contents of the draft legislation, the government was not happy with, so they removed some of them, but nevertheless, I've got 75% of what I wanted to achieve. And so we have a good legislative framework for the audit office. In a couple of minutes, I was able to scribble those 5. So that's what I would say about, in the case of Guyana, examples of legislative framework for transparency and accountability. Of course, there are more. It's not restricted to those 5.
Just give us 1 minute. We're reconnecting to Dr. Jadoopat.
We're having some technical difficulties. Back on, I was kicked out. Apologize for that. Maybe I wasn't saying the right thing, but I wasn't saying anything. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Mr. Goolsarran.
He was finished.
We finished. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that. So we can continue to have a discussion on that, but as I promised, we have if David can please help us to listen to the recording with the with Ana Maria Rodrigues Contreras from Colombia. David, is it okay now for us to? I would like to ask you to introduce yourself to our viewers here today, please, because you're a new face for our viewers, and I'm sure they would like to hear from you directly about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Ana Maria Rodrigues Contreras. I come from Colombia. I am a political scientist with a master's degree in international studies, peace and conflict resolution from the University of Queensland. And I have been working with issues regarding transparency, extractive industry, conflict resolution, and peace building. And I had the opportunity to work for EITI as a World Bank consultant, advising countries such as Colombia, Guyana, Suriname, Dominican Republic to achieve the first steps on becoming EITI countries.
We've been hearing this word transparency and accountability, these words, very often. And can you please tell us what actually people should understand when they hear the word transparency and when they hear accountability from your personal experience as an expert in these areas?
Okay, so transparency as a concept in a nutshell will be to be able to have the information, any type of information regarding a concept that you want to talk about. So if we talk about natural resources, transparency would be that the governments are able to provide the information regarding the data, revenues, contracts. If we're talking about, I don't know, the fight against drug trafficking, transparency would be that people can access information that so they are aware and they can form an opinion with evidence and the right information and not just perspective. So transparency, it would be for me a tool and like instruments, tools, and strategies that you can use to be able to access information on any concept. Regarding accountability, that's more on the side of the counterpart. So me as a citizen, I am able to access the information, but then I need, I don't know, for the government to be able to provide that information and be like, the word accountable would be responsible to provide all the tools and right information so I can access that information. Does it make sense? That would be accountability and transparency in a nutshell for me.
From your experience dealing with so many different countries, what do you find in the laws of those countries that are linked to transparency and accountability?
There are different examples. I can mention, like in Colombia, we have the Open Government Platform and the Transparency Act initiative, for example, in Guyana. There are some of the mechanisms that the countries are using so that everyone can access different type of information from different ministries and different organizations. So it's a way that the governments can be organized and like put together all of the insights of different things in a same platform so that people can access that without having to go one by one and like investigating on their side and like maybe getting confused and maybe the units are not the same one. So it's a matter of standardizing the tools or one platform that you can access to have everything, all the information gathered.
Getting down to the back to in a nutshell, if you can list like some of the challenges, you mentioned some of them, and what are the best practices, and we can close off with your recommendations.
Okay, so challenges would be maybe yeah, I'm gonna start from the access, like coming up with good strategies that are beyond the virtual aspects of the platforms, for example, so you can reach those people that they don't have electricity or internet or anything like that. That could be a challenge, and also a recommendation as well. So when you're doing the due diligence to understand how you create public awareness, have in mind those remote areas, have in mind those ethnic groups that might be in your country that you also have to be aware that they participate. Another challenge would be to get all of the main stakeholders like government, private companies, and civil society, that they're willing and they want to be part of any strategy, and they have the time to do so, because this type of strategies that come up with transparency and accountability, they take time. There's a process, there's always something that goes wrong, so that they have the patience and the willingness to actually do that's also a challenge, but it's also a recommendation, that things take time, and they don't work magically. Thank you. My concluding statement would be that I'm really happy that there are programs and spaces like this so we can talk about more about transparency, and count with me for any future program.
Thank you very much, Anna. Have a good day. Yes, so there we had it, Ana Maria Rodrigues, her perspective on transparency and accountability that she shared with us. We're going to move now into the next aspect of today's program, and that has to do with specifics. I like specifics. And I think transparency and accountability must deal with specifics, not hearsay. Let's move on into specific recommendations that you experience professionals can share with our viewers on how to improve transparency and accountability. And that will be linked to some of the challenges and recommendations. So we're coming towards the end. We have another 15 minutes or so. So please let us start with Mr. Dhanraj. In 2 minutes or 3 minutes, can you please tell us some of the challenges, as you see it, actually it's going to be 2 minutes, challenges and recommendations to resolve those challenges?
Well, the world is actually full of these issues. Every country, no country is really perfect in implementing policies that are both transparent and accountable. Now, many countries have good laws, like some of the previous panelists have said, and some need to add laws to create that awareness and hold people accountable. In other cases where there are laws, it's all about enforcement. So, I mean, when I look at our own country here in the US and what's happening, and I don't want to bring politics into this, but, you know, politics is typically part of our lives, you know, and what is happening here, it shows people not being held accountable. Even justice system is not working to suit. So we have to mobilize all of these mechanisms of government and develop a plan whereby we could get people to be held accountable. Now, all that will take resources and money and time. And of course, there are people who are going to fight tooth and nail so that doesn't happen because they don't want to be caught in it. So that is a big challenge for the world going forward. And the people's mindset as it is, there is no easy time frame for that solution.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let us move on to Mr. McGuire. Your specific list of challenges and solutions and recommendations to resolve those challenges. You're muted. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
I would have raised some of the challenges, major challenges that we face here in Trinidad before. But I think one thing I want to emphasize here now is that even if we've published reports and we do make a big effort to get the public more aware of these reports and their content and so on, for me, that's a huge challenge. That's a major challenge for us and for all countries who are implementing EITI and trying to get, because the real purpose of this thing is to get the public aware and to make the public know, give them the tools, give them the data so that they could do their advocacy, whatever. They could feel comfortable, to use Tony's analogy, they could feel comfortable with the managing the mango estate properly. But if this data, so we need to explore more and more avenues and channels of getting the data to them. And I would imagine now that everybody has this little device and everybody is hot on social media, I would imagine that some of those kinds of modern electronic media channels need to be emphasized, and the data need to be broken up in bits and pieces, and people need to be engaged in the communities in more conversations about the sector's performance, the players, and all these things. So I'm saying we focus a lot on legislation. We know that there is need for some new legislation, but I take Tony's point, some of the existing legislation as well opens windows which we have not jumped through, opens windows that we could use and which we have not done. And perhaps we need to use some of those legislations as well. But for me, a lot of emphasis has to be placed on getting that information out to the public and getting the public to the information, both ways.
Well, we had Globespan 24x7.
And we started that.
Here,
Yes.
we started this. So this is one of the missions here, one of the objectives of this program. So I think, Devin, you want to have a commercial break, you said, at this time?
Yes, we could take a quick break.
Okay, just a quick one, because we have only 30 minutes left. Thank you.
You could go ahead, Dr. Jadoopat.
I think we lost Rudy. No.
Just give us 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Are you missing homemade food, snacks, drinks, roti and curries, or have a busy schedule? Then get your favorite curries and roti delivered directly to your home with all from one supplier. Come order your duck, goat, or chicken, fully cooked and ready to eat with dal puri or bus up shut. We also now have chicken tikka masala or lamb vindaloo available with regular naan or garlic naan. Don't forget to add your solo, icy, coconut water, or Nestle drinks to these delicious meals. Select your choice, and load your box and let allfromonesupplier.com deliver directly to your home. All from One Supplier has you covered for all your food. Plus if you need pepper sauce, curry powders, fish, meat, ghee, and so much more. We also have tasty pastries like pine tarts, cheese rolls, currants rolls, coconut rolls and so much more. Sales are ongoing every week, and your first order is 10% off once you apply the coupon code, Globespan 24x7. Log on to allfromonesupplier.com today and purchase. Allfromonesupplier.com is your one-stop shop for all West Indian items, and remember it's free shipping to all US states.
Okay, so now we're going to move on with specific challenges, best practices, and specific recommendations on transparency and accountability, how to improve it. Who's next? Mr. Goolsarran?
You want me to start?
Well, we want you to give your list of challenges as you see it as an expert,
Okay.
and some of the solutions.
Right. I spoke about the need for EITI to be protected from the influence of the administration or the government. As I said, it is the current Ghana EITI is under the Ministry of Natural Resources, and it has limited budgetary allocation, limited staffing. It's unable to discharge its mandate. So this is a challenge, and out of that challenge will flow the recommendation that we need to have special legislation to insulate Ghana EITI from the executive branch. I've examined the EITI reports on Guyana prepared by the independent administrator. And I found that the report is very difficult to read and to understand and to appreciate in the eyes of the public. So that was the reason why I decided to do a few articles on the report. When I look at the report, it's like in auditing terms, it's like audit work papers put together like that. We don't need that. So I don't know if there is any arrangement that can be made to influence the independent administrator to cut out all the stuff that we would keep as working papers and concentrate on delivering a simple, understandable report so that the general public can understand and appreciate. So that's one of my recommendations.
No, Mr. Goolsarran, this is the EITI standard here, and it actually stipulates how the EITI report is supposed to be prepared. We cannot violate the EITI standard, so you might want to recommend to the International EITI Board for them to change that in the standard. No, but what they have here, I had a discussion with them also. I share your view, but we have to look at the requirement 7, which is actually the basis for Globespan 24x7 starting this program on transparency and accountability. It says here, regular disclosure of extractive industry data is of little practical use without public awareness, without understanding of what the figures mean, and without public debate about how resource revenues can be used effectively. So with that said, the report is supposed to be authentic, must have the substantiating documents there, documented properly. However, it is the work of the multi-stakeholder group to take that report, break it down into palatable pieces, and circulate it a public awareness campaign. Because of the COVID situation, that public awareness campaign has been stalled somewhat. However, it can be done, as you said, write little reports from the report, palatable, and share it out. Now we have social media available, but it's work to be done. So that's just an interjection here. I apologize for that, but I had to add some clarity, knowing that the EITI standard requirement 7 is part of this whole process also.
Yeah, I take your point, but why produce a report that hardly 95% of the people don't understand? If I take the point that the report has to be prepared in accordance with the EITI standard, but 95% or more of the people don't understand. And when I read a report, I try to simplify the report in my articles to the public. So some way has to be found to send a message to those who have developed the standards. Perhaps you can have a 2-part report, a very simplified report, so that the ordinary public can read and understand. The second point.
Sorry, yeah. In future programs, we're going to take your suggestion, and I will try to invite the executive members of the EITI international body to come on the Globespan project, and we'll invite you also to participate in that session.
The second point I want to make is that all the deficiencies identified by the independent administrator, what action is being taken to remedy the deficiency? For example, there is a requirement that medium-sized miners, the maximum area that they could exploit is 1,200 hectares. They can't get more. But yet, the report is pointing to the fact that there are contiguous blocks that are owned by the same miner. In procurement terms, you know, it's like in procurement terms, we call that contract splitting in order to circumvent the rules. What action is being taken?
Okay, we have to wind up because we only have a couple of minutes more. On the recommendations, please go ahead.
Yeah. You finished with me?
No,
or
no.
You want to continue?
No, but you know.
No, I want to stop there. Just those
okay.
two.
Okay. Thank you. So, Paul, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, thanks, Rudy. I shouldn't take that long. I want to make one recommendation, that we have standards around how we collect data and make it available. Many times we get reports in prose forms from different sources, and we can't compare and contrast. So we can standardize data submission to the regulators, for instance, right? And put it in a way that is machine readable, so that people can then search and analyze and put the raw data out there in that format. I can give you an example of a country I know well, where when we spoke about getting this EITI thing going and getting contracts available online, the people doing the technical work to digitize it were told specifically, do not make the contracts machine readable. So people would then have to print and compare clause by clause rather than pulling clauses out. So it really is the sense of the nature of how we manage data, manage documents, the legacy systems we have, prevent us making transparency useful.
So I would take that,
even your reports, when they come out, right? If people could dive into it and extract data, extract information, compare and contrast easily, because things are ordered in a certain way. Now you have some of that, right? So what that does then, it really democratizes information. It means anybody, anywhere, can go in there and look at any slice of information to tell a story about that. Like Dr. Goolsarran is doing, he's an expert. He can look at the whole picture and pull things out. What about students doing research work in university? What about people like yourself living out of the country? How can we get people access to that information so they can contribute to tell a better narrative and share this story in ways people want to be able to digest it?
Right, so in 20 seconds, we have closing statements. Mr. Dhanraj?
Well,
20 seconds, finish. Sorry.
I believe this is one of the big challenges of our times. And it's going to take the effort of everyone with great unity to come up with solutions, writing new legislation, implementing some of the old ones, and to try and close all the loopholes that devious minds get into, and try to prevent other people from enjoying the spoils of their country. So
we're coming to the end of the trial.
Maybe at a session have specific about the example.
Okay. 20 seconds, Mr. Gregory McGuire. Closing statement.
Interesting program. These programs, I have to say that did we have a section for questions? It would have been interesting to perhaps hear some of the concerns raised by our audience. But I think that we've made a good start in terms of helping to spread the word of transparency. I started by saying, and I will close by saying, that this is all about people. This is all about empowering the people. It's all about getting the people information so that they too can be watchdogs on the resource that they.
Thank you. Mr. Goolsarran, closing statements, please.
Well, it has been a pleasure to be on the program, and I hope we can have many more of such programs. I was hoping that we could have been in a position to field questions from the audience, but it looks as if we haven't got any questions to respond to, because I love answering questions. So with that in mind, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're gonna look into that later on. People can submit their questions to Globespan 24x7, and we will be able to share that with you in future. Anthony?
Sure. So there's three arms of government. There's the administrative, or the executive, and the judiciary. Now, we spoke about the political, the executive, and the administrative, but we haven't spoken of the role of the judiciary in getting transparency. People have rights enshrined in the Constitution. How are we using those tools, judiciary and the Constitution, to ensure those rights are being met?
Okay. Thank you very much. Very interesting. I want to thank you, all the participants of this inaugural Globespan program on transparency and accountability. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and we're looking forward to seeing you on the future programs of Globespan 24x7. Transparency and Accountability Watch. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you, Globespan. Thank you, all the sponsors, management and staff. Thank you, Devin, for the technical assistance provided.